Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, translated with commentaries by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Ki Jai. This is Canto 5, Chapter 18, Prayers Offered to the Lord by the Residents of Jambudvip. And this is the little summary that will tell us what we can expect to hear about in the chapter. In this chapter, Sukadeva Goswami describes the different varsas of Jambudvip and the incarnation of the Supreme Lord worshipped in each. The predominating ruler of Bhadrasva Varsa is Bhadrasva. He and his many servants always worship the incarnation known as Lord Hayagriva. At the end of each kalpa, when the demon Ajnana steals the Vedic knowledge, Lord Hayagriva appears and preserves it. Then he delivers it to Lord Brahma. In the land known as Harivarsa, the exalted devotee Prahlad Maharaj worships Lord Nrsingadev. The appearance of Lord Nrsingadev is described in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Following in the footsteps of Prahlad Maharaj, the inhabitants of Harivarsa always worship Lord Nrsingadev to receive from him the benediction of being engaged in loving devotional service. In the tract of land known as Ketumala Varsha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Rishikesh, appears in the form of Cupid. The goddess of fortune and demigods living there engage in his service day and night. Manifesting himself in 16 parts, Lord Rishikesh is the source of all encouragement, strength, and influence. The conditioned living entity has the defect of being always fearful, but simply by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he can rid himself of this defect of material life. Therefore, the Lord alone can be addressed as Master. In the tract of land known as Ramyaka Varsha, Manu, and all the inhabitants worship Matsyadev to this very day. Matsyadev, whose form is pure goodness, is the ruler and maintainer of the whole universe, and as such, he is the director of all the demigods headed by King Indra. In Hiranmaya Varsa, Lord Vishnu has assumed the form of a tortoise, Kurma Murti, and is worshipped there by Aryama, along with all the other residents there. Similarly, in the tract of land known as Uttarakuru Varsa, Lord Hari has assumed the form of a boar, and in that form he accepts service from all the inhabitants living there. All the information in this chapter can be fully realized by one who associates with devotees of the Lord. Therefore, in the Shastras, it's recommended that one associate with devotees. This is better than residing on the banks of the Ganges. In the hearts of pure devotees reside all good sentiments as well as all the superior qualities of the demigods. In the hearts of non-devotees, however, there cannot be any good qualities, for such people are simply enchanted by the external, illusory energy of the Lord. Following in the footsteps of devotees, one should know that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the only worshipful deity. Everyone should accept this proposal and worship the Lord. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Vedaischa Sarvar Ahameva Vidya, the purpose of studying all Vedic literature is to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. If, after studying all the Vedic literature, one does not awaken his dormant love for the Supreme Lord, it is to be understood he has labored for nothing. He simply wasted his time. Lacking attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he remains attached to family life in this material world. Thus, the lesson of this chapter is that one should get out of family life, completely take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So, this is text 1. Sukadeva Goswami said, Bhadrasva, the son of Dharmaraj, rules the tract of land known as Bhadrasva Varsa. Just as Lord Shiva worships Sankarshan in Ilavrita Varsa, Bhadrasva, accompanied by his intimate servants and all the residents of the land, worship the plenary expansion of Vāsadeva known as Hayashirsha. Lord Hayashirsha is very dear to the devotees. He is the director of all religious principles. Fixed in the topmost trance, Bhadrasva and his associates offer their respectful obeisances to the Lord and chant the following prayers with careful pronunciation. Text 2. The ruler Bhadrasva and his intimate associates utter the following prayer. Okay, which begins, Om Namo Bhagavate Dharmayatma Visodanaya Nama Iti. We offer our respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the reservoir of all religious principles, who cleanses the heart of the conditioned soul in this material world. Again and again we offer our respectful obeisances. Prabhupada's commentary. Foolish, materialistic persons do not know how they're being controlled and punished at every step by the laws of nature. They think they're very happy in the conditioned state of material life, not knowing the purpose of repeated birth, death, old age, and disease. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna describes such materialistic persons as mudhas, rascals. Namam duskritino mudha prapadyante naradama. These mudhas do not know that if they want to purify themselves, they must worship Lord Vyāsadeva Krishna by performing penances and austerities. This purification is the aim of human life. This life is not meant for blind indulgence and sense gratification. In the human form, the living being must engage himself in Krishna consciousness to purify his existence. Tapo divyam putrakayena sattvam sudyat. This is the instruction of King Rishabdev to his sons. In the human form of life, one must undergo all kinds of austerities to purify his existence. Yasmat Brahma Sokyam Tvanantam. We're all seeking happiness, but because of our ignorance and foolishness, we cannot know what unobstructed happiness really is. Unobstructed happiness is called Brahma Sokya, spiritual happiness. Although we may get some so-called happiness in the material world, the happiness is temporary. The foolish materialists cannot understand this. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj points out, Maya Sukhaya Baram Udvahato Vimudam. Merely for temporary materialistic happiness, these rascals are making huge arrangements, and thus they're baffled, life after life. Who cleanses the heart of the conditioned soul. So, Prabhupada elaborates on that cleansing and how essential it is to make spiritual advancement. And cleansing of what? Cleansing of the desire for material sense gratification. So there will need to be some austerity, some discipline, some self-control, some penances, some austerities to begin to disentangle from the material, being enamored of the material attractions for material sense gratification. So one of the principles of the devotional service is that when one experiences a higher taste, then one can give up the lower taste. So that's one of the great mercies of Lord Chaitanya's movement, is that he's giving the opportunity to everyone to experience a higher taste so that they can make their own decision, and it'll be it'll be easier to give up the lower things so they can go for the higher things. But without that mercy of the Lord, there's really no access to the higher pleasures, because the Lord is the reservoir of all pleasure. And we say in the verse, the reservoir of all religious principles, and also the reservoir of all pleasure. So, therefore the living being must engage himself in Krishna consciousness to purify his existence. Because Krishna is the supreme pure. Krishna is the purifier. It's like the sun can extract the pure water from a filthy place. You have some nasty water, it's contaminated with whatever, even urine or swamp water or whatever. The sun can extract is purifier, can extract pure water from a filthy place. So Krishna is like that. We come in contact with Krishna, the contaminated living entity becomes purified. So that's how it's done. On one's own, a person can reach, by a very difficult endeavor, and they can reach a platform of liberation. But that's not the highest goal. And usually, if someone reaches that platform, they can't stay there eternally. At some point, they engage again in activities, because the nature of the spirit, of the soul, is to be active. So it's just a matter of what field of activity. Is it a field of activity in the material world, centered around material sense gratification and a false sense of ego? Or is it activities, eternal activities, of the same nature as the spirit soul, the spiritual world? Which field of activity, spiritual or material? Material means birth, death, old age, and disease repeatedly. And spiritual means no interruption, ever increasing, totally blissful. So, human life is meant for engaging in these acts of purification. It's a great opportunity. A great tragedy is if it's missed. Because then the spirit soul that had that human body, they will glide back down through the lower species where that opportunity isn't available. This is a great tragedy. So the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya is meant to divert that tragic situation. distributing Krishna consciousness freely, introducing people to the path of devotion, getting them started. So. Text 3. Alas, how wonderful it is that the foolish materialist does not heed the great danger of impending death. He knows that death will surely come, yet he is nevertheless callous and neglectful. If his father dies, he wants to enjoy his father's property. If his son dies, he wants to enjoy his son's possessions as well. In either case, he heedlessly tries to enjoy material happiness with the acquired money. Yeah, that's there. That is there. And if there's father passes away and there's several children, they fight over who's going to get what to enjoy. Yeah. Even though they see the father passed away, he couldn't take any of it with him, still, and that will be their fate also. Or they want to enjoy it anyway, with no consideration for the ultimate conclusion. It's like being blind or something. Like, if my father had all these things, and then he was forced to give them up, and then also forced to die, what good is it having all those things? But they don't ask those questions. All those things didn't help him. How will they help me? It's interesting to be like right on the edge of the cliff and not to consider what the real problem is. The problem is death. And not to consider that. But you just want the things. Prabhupada's commentary. Material happiness means to have good facilities for eating, sleeping, sexual intercourse, and defense. Within this world, materialistic person lives only for these four principles of sense gratification, not caring for the impending danger of death. After his father's death, a son tries to inherit his money and use it for sense gratification. Similarly, one whose son dies tries to enjoy the possessions of his son. Sometimes the father of a dead son even enjoys his son's widow. Ew. Yeah. Ay. Materialistic persons behave in this way. Thus, Sukadeva Goswami says, how wonderful are these pastimes of material happiness transacted by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, materialistic persons want to commit all kinds of sinful activities, but without the sanction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, no one can do anything. Why does the Supreme Personality of Godhead permit sinful activities? The Supreme Lord does not want any living being to act sinfully. He begs him through good conscience to refrain from sin. But when someone insists upon acting sinfully, the Supreme Lord gives him the sanction to act at his own risk. No one can do anything without the sanction of the Lord, but he is so kind that when the conditioned soul persists in doing something, the Lord permits it, the individual soul, to act at his own risk. Wow. This is the marginal energy, the Jiva Tattva. This is Jiva Tattva is expansion of Krishna. Is conscious living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. And so because they're part and parcel of Krishna, they have that same tendency to act independently. Because Krishna is independent. They have that tendency to do that. However, it's not in their own best interest, because they're not Krishna. They're part of Krishna. So that when that independence is used, or that ability to decide to serve or not to serve, when that is used for concluding and engaging in devotion, choosing devotional service to the Lord, then the living entity actually becomes happy, becomes blissful. But that ability is there to try to act independently of the Lord and try to be like the Lord. It's really, Krishna is really amazing. His parts and parcels are a lot like him. Very, very similar to Krishna, the living entity is. Except for one thing. Well, there's a few things, but the really big one is the quantity. Krishna is a supreme being. There's no one greater than or equal to Krishna. And he is completely independent and can do whatever he wants. He's the source. The living entities, the jivas, the jiva tattva, expanded from Krishna and have almost all the qualities of Krishna, almost. And along with that is the tendency to act independently. But it's not in the best interest of the living entity to act independently, because they're not the source. They have the tendency to act independently, but they're never actually independent. So they can be in the living entity, we can be in the illusion that we're independent, and then there's arrangement for that. Okay, if you want to act independently, the only way we can deal with it is to put you in a situation where you're in an illusion that you're independent. But how can you be independent? Because you're not. You're totally dependent. If you don't want to acknowledge that dependence and engage in devotional service, then there's an arrangement where we can try to act independently. And that's the material energy. We have something that we can try to control and dominate and enjoy. The inferior energy of the Lord, matter. It's like 2-year-olds in a sandbox with toy trucks. And they think they're building big things and they're controlling everything. And there's like 2-year-olds in the sandbox. So, and Krishna is very merciful like that. He's always trying to get the intention of the living entity, give them good direction. So, According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, sons always outlive their fathers in other planetary systems and other lands in this universe, especially on Svargaloka. However, on this planet, Earth, a son often dies before his father. The materialistic father is pleased to enjoy the possessions of his son. Neither the father nor the son can see the reality that both of them are awaiting death. When death comes, however, all their plans for material enjoyment are finished. Text 4. O unborn one, learned Vedic scholars who are advanced in spiritual knowledge certainly know that this material world is perishable, as do other logicians and philosophers. In trance, they realize the factual position of this world, and they preach the truth as well. Yet even they are sometimes bewildered by your illusory energy. This is your own wonderful pastime. Therefore, I can understand that your illusory energy is very wonderful. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. So this is a continuation of the prayers. This is a continuation of the prayers of Bhadrasva and his associates. They offer these prayers and mantras to Lord Hayashirsha, and that's Hayagriva. And this is on Bhadrasvavarsa. It's a tract of land known as Bhadrasvavarsa. Lord Shiva is on Ilavritavarsa, and he's worshipping Lord Shankarshan. And this is a tract of land called Bhadrasvavarsa. And Bhadrasva and his associates are offering respects to Lord Hayagriva. So everyone agrees on the same, everyone is praying to the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. They're all in all these, everywhere, throughout the whole universe. The Lord is the worshipful entity, the worshipful being. So this verse points out how totally amazing and wonderful the illusory energy is, that even those who are advanced in spiritual knowledge and know the world is perishable, and they preach the truth, even sometimes they're bewildered by the illusory energy. So, let's see Prabhupada's commentary. Not only does the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead act on the conditioned soul within this material world, but sometimes it also acts on the most advanced learned scholars who factually know the constitutional position of this material world through realization. As soon as someone thinks, I am this material body, ahamameti, and everything in relationship with this material body is mine, he's in illusion, moha. This illusion caused by the material energy acts especially on the conditioned souls, but it sometimes also acts on liberated souls as well. A liberated soul is a person who has sufficient knowledge of this material world and is therefore unattached to bodily conception of life. But because of association with the modes of material nature for a very long time, even liberated souls sometimes become captivated by illusory energy due to inattentiveness in transcendental position. Therefore, Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mam eviye prapadyante mayamitam taranti de. Only those who surrender unto me can overcome the influence of the material energy. Therefore, no one should think of himself as a liberated person, immune to the influence of Maya. Everyone should be very cautiously execute devotional service by rigidly following regulative principles. Thus he will remain fixed at the lotus feet of the Lord. Otherwise, a little inattention will create havoc. We've already seen an example of this in the case of Maharaj Bharata. Maharaj Bharata was undoubtedly a great devotee, but because he turned his attention slightly toward a small deer, he had to suffer 2 more births, one as a deer and another as the Brahmin Jad Bharat. Afterward, he was liberated and went back home, back to Godhead. The Lord is always prepared to excuse his devotee. But if a devotee takes advantage of the Lord's leniency and purposefully commits mistakes again and again, the Lord will certainly punish him by letting him fall down into the clutches of the illusory energy. In other words, theoretical knowledge acquired by studying the Vedas is insufficient to protect one from the clutches of Maya. One must strongly adhere to the lotus feet of the Lord in devotional service. Then one's position is secure. Yeah. That's the super excellent position of devotional service. Simply liberation is not enough to protect the living entity from the illusory energy. The living entity has desire. So to simply desire to be desireless, which is basically the position of a liberated soul, is that they see the pitfalls of material sense gratification, desire, and they also understand the nature of the temporary nature of the material world. They understand their own spiritual nature. And so they desire not to desire material activity. So it's negating. It's a position of negating. But what the positive is, that they don't know. So to simply desire not to desire is like zero position, zero activity. But they haven't, if you see what happens here, they haven't actually become free from desire, because the desire they have is not to desire. So that's still desire. So they've been tricked by the illusory energy. To desire not to desire is still a desire. So the only solution for that, what do you do with desire? Is you pray to desire to serve Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then the desire becomes purified. There's no reaction. The modes of material nature have no jurisdiction over devotional activities, devotional service. They have no jurisdiction there. So it's not really possible to get rid of desire, simply by desiring to get rid of desire. It's very tricky. Although a person can get some partial relief, temporary relief from the onslaught of the three modes of material nature by desiring not to desire, they really haven't solved the problem, because they're not desiring that which is actually desirable, which is a relationship with the Lord, loving relationship with the Lord through devotional service.